All company employees will be trained to recognize the hazards associated with overhead power lines and to understand the provisions of this standard. Be properly trained on the operation of any mobile equipment such as cranes, boom trucks and earth movers. Know the purpose and limitations of any safety devices used during the job. Use all required PPE. Follow all safe work practices by this overhead power line policy. Supervisors are responsible for complying with this policy during field activities. Stopping work if the conditions of the planned work changes. Notifying the safety coordinator of any work stoppage and reason for it. Rebriefing the work crew if the changes to planned work allow the job to proceed safely. Qualified personnel are responsible for attending all scheduled training. Performing work in compliance with the live line bare hand work near overhead lines policy. Unqualified personnel are responsible for performing this work only when being trained by a qualified person or trainer, under the direct supervision of a qualified person or trained. Working near overhead power lines presents the risk of electrical shocks or burns, and can contribute to additional hazards such as fires, falls and even death. All employees are required to use safe practices when working near power lines, and observe the established safe distance limits established by all applicable regulations. Where aerial lifts, cranes, boom devices, dump trucks or other elevating devices will operate near overhead power line, and there is potential for proximity or contact with the lines of other electrical equipment, work will not begin until a safety meeting is conducted and appropriate steps taken to identify, mark and warn against accidental contact. The supervisor will review operations daily to ensure compliance. All equipment covered under this policy will comply with the following requirements when being moved near power lines or energized transmitters, unless the electrical distribution and transmission lines have been de-energized and visibly grounded at point of work. These requirements do not apply if insulating barriers, which are not a part of, or an attachment to, the equipment or machinery, have been erected to prevent physical contact with the lines. Any overhead wire will be considered to be energized, unless and until the person owning such line or the electrical utility authorities indicate that it is not an energized line and it has been visibly grounded. Prior to work near transmitter towers where an electrical ground directly to the upper rotating structure supporting the boom. Ground jumper cables will be attached to materials being handled by the boom equipment when the electrical charge is induced while working near energized transmitters. Crews will be provided with non-conductive poles having large alligator clips or other similar protection to attach the ground cable to the load. Combustible and flammable materials will be removed from the immediate area prior to operations. Our overhead power line policy applies to all employees and contractors working near energized power line, regardless of voltage. The company will ensure employees are not placed near overhead power lines. Inform employees of the hazards and precautions when working near overhead lines. Post warning decals on cranes and similar equipment regarding 10-foot minimum clearance. Ensure that when equipment is working near overhead lines, a spotter is designated and observes for safe working clearances around all overhead lines and directs the operator accordingly. Use warning cones as visible indicators of their 10-foot safety zone when working near overhead power lines. Notify the local power provider at least 24 hours before any work begins that requires the provider to identify voltages and clearances, or de-energized, apply safety grounds, or relocate lines. Before starting operations where potential contact with overhead electrical systems is possible, the safety coordinator, supervisor, head operator, or person leading the work will identify overhead lines or equipment, and reference their location to prominent physical features, or physically mark the area directly in front of the overhead lines with safety cones, survey tape, or other means. Electrical line location will be discussed at a pre-work safety meeting of all employees on the job. All company employees and contractors must attend this meeting. New or transferred employees will be informed of electrical hazards and proper procedures during orientations. On construction projects, overhead electrical lines or equipment will be conspicuously marked and workers will be reminded of their location by the project supervisor. New employees will be informed of electrical hazards and proper precautions and procedures. Where this is potential for proximity or contact with overhead electrical systems, the local area power provider will be called to decide the need to de-energize, safety ground, remove, or otherwise protect against accidental contact. Where there is a suspicion of low wires, under 20 feet, the local area power provider will be notified to verify and take appropriate action. All electrical contact incidents, including near misses, must be reported to the local area safety coordinator. All heavy equipment, or similar equipment, will display a warning decal regarding electrical contact. Independent truck drivers delivering materials to field locations will be cautioned about overhead electrical wires before beginning work, and a properly trained company employee will assist in the loading and offloading operation. Trucks that have emptied their material may not leave the work location until the boom, lift or box is down and safely secured. Any overhead line must be considered energized until the owner representative, or utility indicates otherwise and the line has been visibly grounded, and the owner representative, or utility must be notified and provided with all pertinent information of the job before the commencement of operations near electrical lines. Where an equipment operator of deliver driver's visibility is impaired, a spotter is required to guide the operator. Predefined hand signals will be used and clearly understood between operator and spotter. When visual contact is impaired, the spotter and operator will begin radio contact. Aerial lifts, cranes, and boom devices will have appropriate warning decals, and will use warning cones or similar devices to indicate the location of overhead lines and identify the 10-foot minimum safe working boundary. Except as prescribed, or where insulting barriers not a part of or an attachment to the aerial device have been erected to prevent physical contact with the lines, an aerial device must maintain the distances from energized distribution and transmission power lines and equipment prescribed in Table 1. No equipment or vehicles are permitted to move under electrical lines without a foreclearance unless the line is removed, de-energized, safety grounded, or otherwise protected. The local area power provider must issue a general permit detailing the specific measures employed to ensure safe operations. Please take the time to review Table 1. Minimum clearance distances for equipment. The clearance requirements of this rule do not apply to the following situations. Where work is preformed from an insulated aerial device that is insulated for the work, and the work is preformed according to the provisions of the Construction, Power Transmission and Distribution, and Telecommunications Safety Standard. Where the owner, authorized representative, or utility representative have ensured that the conductor is insulated for the system voltages and the task will not compromise the insulation of the conductor and or cause an electrical hazard. Where the electrical power transmission or distribution lines have been de-energized and visibly grounded at the point of work, or where insulating barriers that are not a part of an attachment to the aerial work platform have been erected to prevent physical contact with the line. Where work is being preformed by qualified electricians on equipment up to 0.5 kV. 2 qualified electricians will be required for work within the minimum clearance on equipment over 0.5 kV. The insulated bucket, gloves, and sleeves used to comply must be rated at more than the voltage to be worked on, or that with which they might come into contact. Please take the time to review Table 2. Minimum working distances for qualified line clearance tree trimmers and qualified linemen. Please take the time to review Table 3. Minimum approach distances for qualified telecommunications employees. A qualified lineman or a qualified line clearance tree trimmer, working on or near an exposed power transmission or distribution line from an aerial lift, must maintain distances prescribed in Table 2, unless the employee is insulated or guarded from the energized part by gloves or gloves and sleeves, or insulated, isolated, or guarded from any other conductive part, or the energized part is insulated from the employee. A qualified telecommunications employee must maintain the distances prescribed in Table 3 when working from an aerial lift, unless the employee is insulated, isolated, or guarded from any other conductive part or the energized part is insulated from the employee. If an overhead line falls or is contacted, keep everyone at least 10 feet away. Use flagging protect motorists, spectators, and other individuals from fallen or low wires. Call the local area electrical department or utility immediately. Place guards around the area. Do not attempt to move the wire or wires. Do not touch anything that is touching the wire or wires. Be alert to water or other types of conductors present. Crews will have emergency numbers readily available. These numbers will include local area electrical, utility, police or fire, and medical assistance. If an individual becomes energized, no, not touch the individual or anything in contact with the person. Call for emergency medical assistance and the local area electrical power provider immediately. If the individual is no longer in contact with the energized conductors, CPR, rescue breathing, or first aid should be administered immediately, but only by a trained person. It is safe to touch the victim once contact is broken or the source de-energized. Wires that contact vehicles or equipment will cause arcing, smoke, and possibly fire. Occupants should remain in the cab and wait for utility or rescue personnel. Should it become necessary to exit the vehicle, jumping free of the vehicle is the last resort. If operating equipment in an overhead wire is contacted, stop the equipment immediately and if safe to do so, jump free and clear of the equipment. Maintain your balance, keep your feet together and either shuffle or bunny hop away from the vehicle another 10 feet or more. Do not return to the vehicle or allow anyone else to return to the vehicle for any reason until the local area electrical utility has removed the power line from the vehicle and has confirmed that the vehicle is no longer in contact with the overhead lines. The company's safety coordinator will ensure that every employee will be trained in the following minimum elements. Hazards of working near overhead power line. Required personal protective equipment. Minimum safe working distances. Procedures for operating elevated work equipment near power lines, emergency response and first aid for electrical injuries. This safety training provides the requirements and safe practices regarding working near overhead power lines when performing construction, tree trimming, communication tower work or any other work where elevating work platforms or scaffolds are used near power lines. All employees of this company who work in the proximity of overhead lines will conform to our overhead power line